¿Qué hora es? Un minutín más, ya comenzamos. Yeah? Okay, perfect. Thank you for coming today. We have David Ramón, PhD student from the house, and he's originally from Madrid, did his bachelor and master there, and now he's in Sevilla, studying ecology, the ecology movement of kestrel. He's going to present his PhD plan. You have the word.
Thank you, Maria. Hello, thank you for coming to everyone. I'm David. I'm going to present my PhD thesis plan entitled Comparing the Movement Ecology of Common and Lesser Kestrel, supervised by Javier Bustamante and Alexei Vysotsky with a FPA contract. So, first of all, I would like to introduce a bit about the species we are working with, the lesser and the common kestrel. They are two species of falcons which inhabit sympatrically in part of the Iberian Peninsula. And although both species are quite similar, there are some differences that we should take into account. First of all, the common kestrel is bigger than the lesser kestrel. And although both species have a marked sexual dimorphism, if we talk about their morphology, their appearance, the differences between sexes are more patent in the case of the lesser kestrel than in the case of the common kestrel. However, if we talk about their behavior, their ecology, the common kestrel is seems to be more dimorphic. For example, in the common kestrel, just the female incubates, but in the common kestrel, just the female incubates, but in the lesser kestrel, both the female and the male share the incubation during the day, and during the night is the female the one that incubates. Also, the lesser kestrel is a colonial species with colonies that range from a couple of pairs to dozens of them, whereas the common kestrel is a solitary breeder with males that have a high intraspecific competence and with very exclusive foraging areas. Also, there are differences regarding the trophic needs. So, the lesser kestrel is considered a specialist in inhabiting mainly steppe-like and farmland habitats, where they forage mainly on invertebrates such as tetigonids, whereas the common kestrel, at least in the south of Europe, is considered a generalist species with a wider range of prey. There are also differences regarding their migration, so in most of the cases the lesser kestrel is a long-distance trans-Saharan migrant, whereas the common kestrel is a short-distance migrant or a resident individual, although there are always exceptions in these cases. Finally, there are other differences, but I would like to remark that in Spain, the populations of both species have declined in the last year. So, in the last Red Book of the Birds of Spain, the lesser kestrel is listed as vulnerable and the common kestrel as endangered. So, once we know a bit about the species we are working with, I would like to introduce a bit the thesis organization. So, we have planned two sections, one in which we deal with the winter, the movement ecology of lesser kestrels during winter, and a second one where we deal with the individual specialization in the foraging strategies of both lesser and common kestrel during the breeding period. And finally, we have planned a fifth chapter about the energy expenditure in kestrels. So, to start with the movement ecology of lesser kestrels during winter, The first chapter is entitled Comparing Movement Strategies of Migratory and Resident Lesser Kestrels During Winter. So this species is a falcon whose breeding range goes from the Iberian Peninsula and Morocco in the western tip to the steppes of Central Asia in the Far East. However, after the breeding period and the postnuptial migration, they move to their winter quarters in sub-Saharan Africa. Although the individuals from the same specific colonies don't share the same specific winter quarters, there's a kind of segregation in the winter distribution according to the breeding procedence of the individuals. For example, individuals from the Iberian Peninsula overwinter mainly between Senegal, Mali, and Mauritania, whereas individuals from Italy or the Balkans overwinter in more eastern areas such as Mali, Chad, Niger, Nigeria. In the specific case of individuals from the Iberian Peninsula, recently Lopez Ricaurte and collaborators have described how the individuals arrive on a broad front to the Sahel between September and October mainly, coinciding with the ending of the wet season, and as far as the dry season progresses and the winter too, the productivity in the Sahel also decreases, and the individuals tend to concentrate towards the two main areas, one around the river mouth of the Senegal River in Senegal, and the other one around the inner delta of the Niger River in Mali, where the productivity is still relatively high. In this process, the individual uses between 2 and 3 staging sites, using a strategy that has been described as itinerant. However, although most of the individuals perform this long-distance trans-Saharan migration, some individuals remain the whole year in their breeding areas, acting as resident. In these individuals, the distribution during winter is very restricted by the temperature to the most thermic and less seasonal areas of their breeding range. For example, in the Iberian Peninsula, most of the observation come from the Guadalquivir Basin, the southeast of Spain, or the Ebro Basin. And in Italy, there are observations from Sicily or the south of the Italic Peninsula. So, in the number of records of lesser kestrels during winter in the Mediterranean has increased during the recent years, and so it has been modelized that their distribution during winter in this area will increase in the next year according to a climate change scenario. So, in the breeding colonies, there coexist individuals that perform a long-distance trans-Saharan migration with individuals that remain as resident the whole year, giving rise to a strategy that is called partial migration. However, this isn't a fixed strategy, and an individual can switch from one strategy to another in different years. For example, we can see here a case of an individual tagged in Doñana that remained one winter in the Doñana area, performing also a trip to the north of Morocco, and the following winter it performed a long-distance trans-Saharan migration to Senegal. So there are also cases of the opposite situation, and it fits with what is called a conditional migration, when the migration is triggered by a certain environmental threshold, and once this environmental threshold is reached, the individual migrates. Although there can be also differences between individuals in this environmental threshold. However, little is known about the movement ecology of lesser kestrels during winter in the case of the resident ones, and neither about the causes and consequences of this partial migration strategy. So, in this first chapter, we have planned to study first to describe the movement ecology of lesser kestrels in the Iberian Peninsula during winter, and we ask whether these individuals act also as itinerant or as the ones that migrate to the Sahel, and if there's a particular geographic pattern. In this case, we expect that individuals in the Iberian Peninsula remain also more attached to their breeding colonies during winter, and therefore we don't expect them to perform this itinerant pattern of movement. Also, we ask if the home ranges and distance traveled to reach the foraging areas are bigger are larger in the case of resident individuals than in the case of trans-Saharan ones. So we expect that individuals that remain in the Iberian Peninsula, according to an area with a lower availability of prey, perform larger distance and cover wider areas to fulfill their food requirements. So these are our hypotheses. To do that, we are using GPS movement data from individuals tagged with GPS devices, Interrex and PathTrack. For the individuals in the Iberian Peninsula, we have data from 17 individuals, most of them tagged in Doñana and one tagged in La Palma del Condado. And also, we have data from two individuals from Los Barrios in Cádiz, tagged by the Grupo Ornitológico Tumbabuey, and one individual from Córdoba, tagged by SEO-BirdLife. And we compare this movement data of resident individuals with the movement data of individuals that overwinter in the Sahel. So we have data from 37 males and 37 females in this area, in the Sahel, and that have been already analyzed by López de Caurte and collaborators in the previous work, but we are doing here another kind of analysis. So in the second chapter, we continue dealing with the movement ecology during winter of lesser kestrel, and it's entitled Habitat Selection and Influence of Weather in the Movements of Lesser Kestrel During Winter. So, as far as we know, there's just one study that addressed the habitat selection of lesser kestrel during winter and is restricted to a locality of the Ebro Basin, where Tella and Forero described that the lesser kestrel actively selected the stable among the available habitats. However, we consider that it's important to expand the focus to other localities with different conditions in order to have a better idea of the habitat requirements of the species. And also, we consider that it's important to not only to focus in the breeding period, as most of the habitat selection studies do, but also to consider other periods on the year in order to develop appropriate conservation measures. So, also, on the other hand, we consider that the climate is an important factor explaining the winter distribution of lesser kestrels in the Mediterranean. But as far as we know, there's neither any study about how the meteorology or the extreme weather condition can influence the movement of lesser kestrels during winter. So, in this chapter, our aims and hypothesis, first aim is to study the habitat selection in the Iberian Peninsula and Sahel during winter. And also, we would like to study the influence of weather conditions and meteorological events in the territory change on winter. In this case, we expect that, for example, sudden temperature drops, storms, or in the case of the Sahel, a sudden increase in the evapotranspiration can trigger that an individual change from a certain territory to another. So, for this chapter, we are going to use the same movement data as in the previous one, and we will cross that with meteorological information and with land cover information such as land use or NDVI. In the specific case of the habitat selection analysis, we are going to focus just in the days when the individual remain as sedentary in a certain place. That is to say that an individual, for example, in this case, in Doñana, in La Casa del Perito, near Huerta Tejada, an individual remain starts the day in its roost in La Casa del Perito, and then it moves to its foraging area. So at the end of the day, it returns back to the same roosting place. So we are only going to keep with those days when the individual returns back to the same roosting place as the previous day. So for the habitat selection analysis, we exclude all the fixes that belongs to the roosting place and the fixes that belong to the travel to the foraging areas and the returning back to the roosting place. So we keep just the fixes that potentially belong to the foraging area, and we will compare the habitat characteristics of these fixes that belong to the potential foraging area with other randomly selected fixes in an area at a similar distance to the roosting place that haven't been used. So in the third chapter, we are going to start now with the second section, where we deal with the individual specialization of both lesser kestrel and common kestrel during the breeding period in their foraging strategies. So when we talk about individual specialization here, I'm going to talk about this variability in the behavior, in the movement, and in this case in their movement patterns, and specifically in their foraging strategies that go beyond the one that can be assigned to the differences between sexes, between population, or between age classes, and so there are differences intrinsic to the individuals. And it's important to say that this kind of variability in the movement ecology has been normally discarded as residual variance, but in the last years there's an increasing number of studies that address this issue. So, for example, in this paper, Hertel and collaborators have developed a methodological framework to address this issue in movement ecology studies, and they describe some components of this individual variability that is important to explain before saying what we are going to do. So, first of all, for example, when we talk about the individual variability, we can talk about behavioral type. That is that some individuals can differ in the average behavior that they have. For example, that some individuals are more prone to hunt or forage in a certain manner than other ones. But individuals can also differ in the way they adapt their behavior or their foraging strategies, in their case, with an environmental gradient. So they can respond in a different way, some individuals than another. Also, individuals can differ in their behavioral predictability. So some individuals can be more consistent in their movement strategies, and other individuals can be more variable. And finally, they talk about the behavioral syndrome. That some behaviors or some characteristic of the foraging strategies can be correlated one to another. In the case of the lesser kestrel, there's a paper that already analyzed it in a first step. So they describe that some lesser kestrel are more prone to forage in a more passive way from a post, perched, and searching for the possible prey that are near this post. And other individuals are more prone to search their prey in a more active way, looking for the prey actively flying and hovering. But they also find that there's not an significant influence of the individual plasticity. So the individuals adapt their foraging strategy in a similar way, with an increasing solar radiation and with an increasing wind cross. So when the solar radiation is higher and the wind is higher too, the individuals are more prone to hunt in a more active way, hovering and flying. But what can we contribute to this system? So we studied two species, the common kestrel and the lesser kestrel, that have, as we have said before, different foraging behavior in two different study areas, Doñana and and La Palma del Condado and Villalba del Alcor. That is an area that is between both villages. So in the case of Doñana, it's a more marshland habitat with some rice crop and cotton crop, and also some legumes and cereal, where the individuals hunt mainly on skinks and scolopendra, and they have a higher prey availability than in the other area. So they start to breed earlier, and they have a higher productivity, usually laying more eggs and rearing more chicks. But in the other case, La Palma del Condado and Villalba del Alcor is a more typical cereal crop, dry crop, mainly dominated by wheat and barley, and also some flour. There are also some flowers and legume crops. In this place, they forage in other prey, such as, for example, tetigonids, and the productivity is lower. They start to usually to breed later, and they lay a lower number of eggs, and they rear less chicks than in the other area. So we find that what are the questions what we ask in this chapter? First of all, we would like to see which are the differences between population. For example, we expect that in a population where there's plenty of resources, there are more resources, the individual prey mostly on their preferred prey, and therefore they don't specialize too much. So, but we expect that in an area with lower availability of resources, individuals will tend more to specialize more. Also, we want to look at the differences between species. We expect that common kestrel to be a more, as it's a more generalist species, to have a higher specialization in individual in the foraging strategies. And we ask also if as a generalist the common kestrel can be comprised of specialist individuals, that each individual specialized in a different prey and different foraging strategies, or it can be comprised of generalist individuals too. So that's another question we have in mind. And in the third point, we go on to analyze the different components of this individual variability that we have told before, like the types of behavior, the environmental plasticity, or the predictability in the foraging strategies. Here I have included an image about the movements of 4 males of common kestrel that bred the last year in the Centro Visitantes José Antonio Valverde in very close nest boxes that have foraging areas very exclusive between them. So we expect that according to these differences the differences in these areas, these areas will have different microhabitat conditions, different prey. So we expect that the individuals specialize in a different way according to the characteristics of the habitat where they are hunting. To reach the aims of this chapter, we are going to use GPS and accelerometer data from lesser kestrel. So in the case of the uncommon kestrel, in the case of the lesser kestrel, individuals were deployed with axi-track devices. These kind of devices are little devices that record GPS and accelerometer at very high resolution, but it's necessary to recapture the bird some days later in order to recover the information. So there we have 211 deployments with information from a few days to 2 weeks, each of the deployments, that have information of the GPS position at its second, its minute, or its 3 minutes according to the schedule that has been programmed, and it records also continuous accelerometer data. With this information, we would like to characterize each of the foraging trips, what is to say, when the individual leaves the nest box, search for the food, and come back, and the characteristic of this and characterize the characteristics of these foraging trips. In the case of common kestrel, we will follow a similar procedure, but with UAV devices. In this case, we don't need to recover the device as the common it transmits to an antenna the information, and we don't need to recapture the bird. In this case, it provides information for a longer period. We have information from 44 individuals, and usually they are at one position each 3 minutes, but this is variable according to the schedule with which it has been programmed, and variable accelerometer data, but in this case the data is in intervals. It's not taken continuously. And the same way that in the other case, we are going to compute a statistic per foraging trips. So we can have the GPS positions and the accelerometer data. The accelerometer record the acceleration in the change in the acceleration in the 3 axes of the space. So thanks to the work that has been developed by Daniel García Silveira and collaborators, we will be able to recognize the different behaviors that an individual is doing in its moment. For example, when the individual is hovering, when the individual is perching, when is flapping, or when is gliding or soaring, for example. So with this information, we can, per foraging trip, characterize how is this movement pattern and the percentage of behaviors, for example, of each foraging trip. And also we can compute the ODBA, that is a proxy of the energy expenditure at each moment. We also can compute these variables at different temporal scales, for example daily, and later apply other multivariate or classification techniques in order to specify which part of the variability belong to the differences between individuals. In the fourth chapter, we ask about how the foraging strategy, if the foraging strategies in kestrel are associated with prey or habitat selection. Here, I would like to remind that the common kestrel in the north of Europe is considered a vole specialist, a specialist hunting mainly on voles. But in the south of Europe, it prey on a wider range of prey. However, the lesser kestrel, as we have said before, is a specialist species foraging mainly on invertebrates, although this is variable among colonies. So, in this case, we would like to see if the individual specialization that we studied in the previous chapter is related to diet, and if it's related to, and if the different foraging strategies are related to the habitat. For example, we think that perching, that is a less energy demanding strategy, will be more prone to hunt a different some prey, and the hovering, that is more energy demanding, will be more prone to hunt another type of prey. To that, we will use the movement data and the individual specialization results that we will expect to have from the previous chapter, and relate it with the prey information from the camera traps that are deployed simultaneously to the movement data. So this way we expect to relate the individual specialization to the prey characteristics. Finally, in a fifth chapter, if there's enough time, we would like to study the energy expenditure in kestrel with heart rate loggers. In this case, the accelerometer that I said before provide the proxy of the energy consumption, the ODBA. That is this is a relative proxy. You can know if in a certain moment the individual is consuming more energy than another, but you can, for example, that when the individual is hovering, it's consuming more energy than when it's gliding, but you don't know how much energy the individual is consuming. To address this issue, some studies in the recent years have developed heart rate devices that measure the heart rate in the field. With the heart rate, we will have a more a proxy of the energy consumption that is more related to the to an absolute energy consumption, because it's more related to the oxygen consumption, not only. So you can assign an absolute measure to each of the behaviors. So our main objective with this chapter is to assign an average energy expenditure to each of the main behaviors of the kestrel. For example, hovering, perching, gliding, flapping. So with the devices that have been developed by Alexei Vysotsky of the University of Zurich that record accelerometer and heart rate simultaneously, we would like to relate this ODBA with the heart rate that the individuals are having at each moment. However, once we have the heart rate, we have to transform it into an oxygen consumption value. For that, we have thought about using respirometry trials, although probably there's not enough time during this thesis to address this issue. And maybe it will be addressed later, but in a first step, we have thought about using an allometric equation that has been used in other studies that relate the heart rate with the oxygen consumption as a function of the proportion between heart weight and the body weight. So this information about the energy expenditure will be useful to know the implications of different foraging strategies, of the migration, or the consequences of different environmental conditions on flight. So to finish, I would like to thank all the people that work in this study system and that have worked before, and thank you all of you for your attention.
Thank you, David. It was really interesting and really complete, your PhD program.
Thank you.
So now it's time for questions. It starts. Do you have any? Go for it.
Thank you, David. It was very, very interesting, your talk. Just curious about the data that you are trying to get from Africa. And did you already marked 17 individuals, did you say?
Yeah, well, no, the individuals were tagged in previous projects, and some of them were analyzed. So in most cases, the individuals are tagged here, and the movement data is recovered when the individual comes back. Although with some new devices that are being deployed, individuals can be transmitted also via GSM. With the mobile signal, for example, and you don't need that the bird is, to remain in the same specific area. But it has, they are most of them. I'm going to read here. Are from previous years. They have been already obtained. Okay, sorry. Here there are data from different colonies and from different groups that have been obtained from 2016 until now. So we have data from 37 males and 37 females. I don't know if I have answered your question or it's not.
Yeah, that you received the data.
Yeah, we are continue obtaining
the data,
but most of them has been already
And which frequency do you have, like the location points?
It depends. We are using, for these studies, we are using 1 fix per hour, but the new devices sometimes can provide more frequency according with the temperature or the solar radiation. So, for example, with interest, sometimes we have data if for short periods of a position, it's a minute or a variable schedule. It is variable, but it can go from one position from each minute to one position each hour. But for the main, most of the objectives that we are working with in these chapters, we are going to use resample the data to a resolution of one position per hour.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much.
More questions?
Yeah. So regardless of whether the lesser kestrel will or will not migrate during the winter, I would complement the empirical studies with a theoretical one based on game theory, because I think the strategy that an individual is going to follow will depend not only on its own choice, but also on the choice of the other individuals. So in other words, the behavioral strategy is going to be frequency dependent. So an individual will live or will migrate if most of the other individuals in the colony will stay, or perhaps it's better for that individual to stay if most of the individuals are going to migrate. I think that could complement the empirical work you are planning to do.
It's a difficult aspect to address, but it's true that is something that could happen, because there are colonies where there are more individuals that migrate than other ones that are less individuals, although the individual can change also from one strategy to another. But I don't know how we could address this issue, because is from the point of view of the methodology, it's difficult to know to follow the individuals that remain here in the Iberian Peninsula. But I think it's a very interesting point. Thank you.
Any question more? No? Okay, so we can finish this here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria.
It was really